Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here to kick off our baseball coverage for 2023. We're really excited about that. And the polls have been coming out. Blake, perhaps you have noticed, not the first time, there's a very heavy SEC presence in the top 25s where you're seeing lots of teams getting mentioned. And my goodness, very top heavy. What have you got? 7 SEC teams in D1's top 25, including a top couple at the very top in Tennessee and LSU. You've got Ole Miss 4, the defending national champions. But LSU, the number 1, I don't know that that's to anybody's surprise. Tennessee might have a case. Ole Miss could have a case based on what it did a year ago and bringing a lot of players back. But in my mind, Blake, the selection of LSU was perfectly defensible for reasons I'll go into later. And this is a team, I'll be honest, it's not exact, but there's some 2019 Vanderbilt vibes with this bunch. That may be the best team that I've seen in terms of teams that won it all. You know, sometimes you get hot in postseason and win it. Oregon State's done that a couple times. Sometimes you see great teams burn out at the end like Tennessee did a year ago. Sometimes teams put it all together and have a great season and a great postseason like Vanderbilt did in 2019. And this LSU team in some ways reminds me of that because you've got phenomenal pitching. You've got a lineup where you can name the bats, guys that you're going to see playing Major League Ball. You've got an infusion of the number 1 recruiting class in the country in terms of freshmen. You got the number 1 transfer class. That's where LSU probably separates from Vanderbilt a little bit. Transfers in 2019 weren't a big thing. But point I'm making here is LSU's got pretty much everything. We need to see it proven. We need to see some defense. That's probably LSU's biggest weakness. But my goodness, Blake, when I'm looking at who's going to be number 1, I'm just thinking it's got to be LSU, and you're starting to see the people that do the polls really agree with that.
Yeah, just a note, I know you said there were 7 in the top 25, but it is 7 in the top 10, right?
7 in the top 10 is what
yeah,
I meant.
I just wanted to make sure that was – I think Alabama and South Carolina are in there, so I guess it would be 9 in the top 25. But the bigger story is 7 in the top 10 because that is just ridiculous, of course. And I mean, yeah, like you said, in your mind, LSU's number 1, but let's be honest, like I think in everybody's mind outside of maybe a competing fan base, a Tennessee that has Tennessee at 2 or I mean, again, look, Ole Miss and A&M just said D1 or top 5. I mean, hey, you can certainly make your argument for those kind of teams. And like we just said, especially, if you're looking at D1, but they're not the only one. You look at others. I don't remember what the Baseball America one, that the 1 through 10 is, but if you have that many SEC teams in the top 10, you can certainly make arguments one way or the other. But like you said, I think look, Chris, Barry, Barry, our wonder dog over here, and Oreo as well. They're a big fan of the dogs, right? Like they could probably they can make an argument somewhere for one of the dogs maybe, but even Barry in his preseason SEC baseball poll, which he just released to me yesterday, he had LSU at number 1. And again, he's a big dog guy. So that just kind of showed. And I feel like we were, and this is even before like the transfers started kicking in, right? Like I feel like we had this discussion at the end of last season. We're like, okay, if you get, obviously we're talking about Dylan Cruz and those guys, we're kind of talking about the nucleus and we're looking ahead. We're thinking ahead. Like, all right, if this team can fill some of these gaps, if they can, improve here, improve there, like look out, right? Because they've kind of got kind of that foundation that you need to become what everyone thinks they're going to become now. And like you said, I mean, look at the transfer group they're bringing in, obviously some of the young guys that are there. And I mean, it is like you look at the, lineup and you just look at all these different areas and whether it's hitting, pitching, obviously 2 very important areas, but I mean, they just feel like they've got kind of that it factor, which is how the lineup is built. And I think the most exciting thing, and we always say this, right? It's in the era of transfers. It's just let's get everybody out there and get the season going and just see how it all kind of comes together. But if you just look at it based on talent, I mean, what else do you say? There's a reason why I think they are probably going to be a consensus number 1 for, I think they are so far in terms of like most people that you would respect, reputable publications and all that. I mean, it makes sense because I don't know that, again, if we had this conversation late in last season, we're thinking, all right, they can certainly get there. They need to pick up a few pieces. And when you look at the guys that they're bringing in, I think they picked up the pieces to make it
Yeah.
justifiable that they're in the number one spot entering the season.
Yeah, I mean, that lineup, I think it starts with the lineup. And you got Dylan Cruz, who's probably the favorite to be the number one pick in June to the Pirates, which we'll go into that a little bit later. I think you've got several guys in the SEC that might be able to make a case, but in my mind, Cruz has got the strongest one. He's been a stud hitter ever since he stepped on campus. You got Tommy White, who transferred from North Carolina State, who set an NCAA freshman record with 27 home runs last year. You got Trey Morgan, who's been one of the more underrated players in the league for a few years. I think he had an injury last year. I was seeing D1 baseball say, I don't remember that at the time, but that explains why Morgan didn't have although he had a 414 on base percentage. Still a pretty good year. But that's a threesome that I don't know that anybody in the country can match. You've got a couple of freshmen in Paxton Kling, Jared Jones, that are among the best freshmen in the country. You've got, I presume, Paul Skeens, the two-way guy at Air Force, will see some time at the plate. Josh Pearson was productive in a little bit of time a year ago. Jordan Thompson, their shortstop, comes back, gets on base a lot. You got some other guys that are newcomers coming in. You don't know what that's going to look like, but you got guys that get on base up and down the lineup. You got guys that can slug. And it's just not a lineup. It's not a lineup you wanted to pitch to last year. It's not a lineup you want to pitch to this year either.
I would say they hit the ball well last year, right? And now it's like, well,
yeah,
they're going to be probably better this year, and that is kind of a scary thing. But yeah, I'm intrigued. You talk about the Tommy White addition, and yeah, I mean, just kind of what that adds to your lineup, right? Anytime you have a guy like that coming in, and like you said, just what he was able to do there, and now he comes over and joins a group that already, as we talked about, it certainly had offense last year, and now you add him to the mix with Cruz in there and all these. I just feel like, and I know this word's kind of overused a lot, but like versatility, like the options. I just feel like they have a lot of options here, like in how they can approach a game, and just in terms of all the different guys who can do a little bit of. You have different skill sets that kind of mesh together. I feel like perfectly, at least on paper, right? And I know perfectly can be a strong word, but they're not going to be perfect. But it is one of those things where you just kind of look at the pieces and you're thinking, okay, if you assume the chemistry's there from a talent standpoint, these pieces really fit together very nicely. Yeah. And like again, if you're just going up and down the lineup and you're looking at these guys and you're saying, all right, this is Tommy White's strength, this is Trey Morgan's strength, this is Dylan Cruz's strength, and you keep going down the line, you're like, all right, these all mesh well together. And you talk about the pitching group, and I know too they've added, Christian Little from Vandy, and yeah, like there's just so many things with this team that I just look at, and I think it is kind of one of those where you just expect them to be better. I mean, I guess that's the question, right? I mean, you pretty much expect them to be better in all the important areas. And, again, whether that's they were good offensively last year, but be able to hit the ball even better this year, because you do have the addition of a guy like White, I think specifically in what he can do. But then you talk about the pitching and you feel like, adding Paul Skeens to the mix and the overall depth there is better. The fielding, I mean, look, we're going to do like our full LSU preview, right? This is kind of just the appetizer, but I just think if you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, if you're someone just coming into the season, you're like, all right, well, why in the world is LSU picked number one by everybody? Well, if you just start going through the lineup, you start looking at, what they did last year and some of the pieces they have back, now what they're adding to the mix this year and how all of it kind of comes together. I think it's impossible not to, sit here and drool over the possibilities with this team, just because it's a lot of fun to think about what they could be at their best. So.
Well, if you want to pick nits, a lot of it's defense.
Right.
Now, some of that'll be behind the plate. Brady Neal is their freshman who's gotten good reviews, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes when they play the games for real, and you're battling the speed of the game and those sorts of things. The pitching, to me, I mean, obviously LSU staff is about as talented as anybody's in the country. But if you want to hedge your bets a little bit, Skeens has done it in the Mountain West, which is nothing close to the SEC in terms of the offense he's going to see. Was a really good pitcher, but maybe not as dominant as the stuff would suggest. Now, Skeens did start to hit triple digits with the fastball in the last year. Is probably going to be better. And look, LSU has ripped Minnesota's pitching coach, got him away in the middle of the season. You never see that. How many times has a major league pitching coach
that's
left
unusual.
in the middle of the season? But LSU's throwing around cash, and that spoke. So Skeens is, look, any team in the country would love to have Paul Skeens. But if we're going to dig in a little bit, let's see how that goes against the SEC. And I think it's going to go well. But I'm just saying that's a little bit of an if. Ty Floyd's been a good pitcher so far for them. Grant Taylor is the guy that a lot of people think has taken a jump up. Thatcher Hurd from UCLA was really, really good last year. It should be phenomenal for LSU. And then you got Christian Little, who was very up and down at Vanderbilt. But you got a lot of other guys. You got a JUCO arm or two coming in. You got Blake Money, who I think was their opening day starter a year ago, who's from our neck of the woods in the Nashville area. It feels like LSU's got a lot of talent and a lot of depth. And frankly, your pitching doesn't have to be perfect with that lineup either, if by chance that it's not quite as good as people have projected.
I think that's what we always talk about. And, we talk about this in all sports, but I know sometimes people can kind of talk about depth and be like, well, depth maybe can be overrated. Now, I think sometimes when you're talking about it, once again, if we say like it's a basketball or something and only have 5 guys on the floor at one time or something, that's a little different. But like in baseball, I think, we've always talked this, like just having the depth,
tournament game, you've got to have arms.
And having the options, right? It's not just having guys on the roster filling a number, but it's like, all right, we don't feel like we don't drop off that much if we have to plug this guy in here on this day or or whatever. And I think that's where, when you look at how this roster's been built, I feel like that was specifically one thing certainly every team wants to achieve, is to have the deepest roster if you can have. But I think they did a really good job with this one, because you do feel like, again, there are some guys that are going to stand out above the others, but I feel like LSU has a lot of options, whether pitching, and so I think specifically in the rotation and just all the different options they have there, I think it's okay. We feel pretty good about being able to turn to this guy if we need him here or there. And it's just, I don't know. I'm excited about this. And something else, I was looking at, and we'll probably look at this a little bit more as we do our team previews, but we do look ahead at the schedules and those kind of things. You want to talk about a fun start to SEC play? They go to A&M for their first series, right? Think about how big of a series that is right off the bat, given where the projections are for A&M. They get Arkansas next at home. Then they get Tennessee at home.
Goodness.
And then they go to South Carolina, who again is,
which won't be easy,
projected a top 25 team. So, that's a heck of a way to start SEC play, isn't it? For LSU. And look, so we know what to expect every year. You're gonna play a lot of series against top 25 teams, because like we said, D1 has 9 in their top 25, like 9 SEC teams in their preseason top 25. So, it's going to happen, but I just think like the fun of thinking about them starting off at A&M and then getting Arkansas and then getting Tennessee. That is, hey, we'll obviously find out exactly where LSU is.
TV.
Yeah,
it is.
like unbelievable. Like what a great schedule in terms of, like, if you're talking about high profile, way to jump into SEC play. What a great schedule for that. Now, again, you'll see what LSU is capable of just in, the non-conference portion, because I think I'm looking at their schedule here, and they've got the Round Rock Classic in the end of February. They got Kansas State, Iowa, Sam Houston State there. They go to Texas on February 28th. But man, it's just like you start to look ahead and think about the possibilities. If everything comes together the way we think it can for some of these top SEC teams, you've got some fun matchups right off the bat. So,
well, if you're looking at teams that could challenge, my goodness, we could spend a lot of time. You've got Tennessee is going to be most people's number 2. You've got Florida was, I think, Baseball America's number 3. I think A&M was number 4 in D1 baseball. You've got Vanderbilt 6 in BA, 10th in D1. You got Texas A&M at 7 in BA, and again 4th in D1. You got Ole Miss, I think 4th or 5th in D1 and 10th in Baseball America, and then you got Arkansas. I mean, these are all teams that have won national titles, come close to winning national titles, won conference titles. It's absurd. Tennessee, though, I think would seem to be the best team on paper to challenge, and it's because of pitching, right? I know that Tennessee, you had Blake Burke, you had Jared Dickey, you had guys that produced a lot when they played a year ago. But it's not as old a lineup as Tennessee had a year ago. And look, Tennessee's going to be fine on offense, I think. You get the transfer shortstop from Kansas. You do have some guys back, but
they may not hit as many home runs. I mean, I think that's probably
no. They're not. I'll call that now. I think you're going to.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see home runs. This is a spoiler to the season. I'm hearing some things that indicate home runs might be brought back down to earth this year. I'll just leave it at that. But I think the thing with all the home runs and all the drama involving Tennessee last year, and there's a lot of both, but Tennessee's pitching staff, Blake, in league play was allowing literally one half a base runner less than whoever the next best team was. I don't remember who that was, which is, I mean, that's enormous. I think people last year and all the other stuff were missing the pitching component to Tennessee. And when you bring back Dollander, Burns, and Beam all from last year, now I think that you have some concerns. You saw Dollander miss some time, although I think that was being struck by a line drive. You saw Beam and Burns get their innings managed a little bit, and you saw Beam in particular start to slip. None of those guys threw a ton of innings, and they don't have as many 4th and 5th year guys in the bullpen. They don't have Ben Joyce. They lose a lot there, but they do develop pitching talent. But I think when you start with those 3 guys on the back end, or on the front end, I'm sorry, that neutralizes a lot. And look, you've got some other teams in this league that are going to pitch too. Florida's going to pitch. It gets Sproat back. It added a transfer from Wake Forest, who's a potential mid-first rounder. You mentioned South Carolina. Carolina's going to have a really good rotation with a little bit of depth. Vandy may have as much pitching as anybody this year if you get into the bullpen and look at their depth there and where they start with Carter Holton. But I think Tennessee, the fact that the Vols still have some hitting left, and it's got that phenomenal threesome and a few guys left over in the bullpen. I think, to me, I would agree with Tennessee being the logical number 2 as we sit here in late January.
Yeah, I feel like they're like you said, I think you just really go through the rosters, and we're obviously making our way through all of them as we get ready to do all of our previews, but it seems that way. Like, I think that's the strongest argument you can make. And again, it is, I think, based on that pitching trio of those guys. It's just ridiculous when you put the numbers together on them. I mean, they were combined, 26-3, all had an ERA under 3. Dollander, Burns both had over 100 strikeouts. Just, I mean, some ridiculous numbers when you really dive into those guys. And I mean, like you said, you're playing a series. It's 3 games in the SEC, and so it's like, my goodness, it's just when you have those guys leading the way. Like we said, sure, you can look at the guys that they lost from last year in terms of, again, just sort of the home runs they contributed and all those guys. Again, maybe they don't hit as many home runs this year, but they've still got some options. Given the guys they brought in, right? They may, again, may not hit that level in terms of having that many guys that could just, I mean, again, that was just a special team. I mean, let's call it what it is. But
that's the most dominant regular season team I have ever seen.
Right. And that's what, it's easy to say, well, that they may take a step back. Well, yeah, they may take a step back from being just a dominant team into being still, one of the top 2 teams in the country. So, I think Tennessee's probably the team that has the strongest argument, against the pretty much consensus LSU at number 1. But boy, that just again shows you kind of where the SEC's at when you can when you start with those two teams, which again most polls are going to start with those two teams, it shows you. I mean, it's just these two
Yeah.
are pretty ridiculous, and it should set up for a wild ride. So
Yeah, and again, let's not dismiss A&M, which I think their pitching is a little behind. They've got some good pitchers and some good options that emerged in Omaha, but I don't in that lineup, they get a lot of those guys back, and they were old a year ago. So they're one. Florida's got Wyatt Langford, who's one of the better hitters in the country. Brandon Sproat is back for another year. They've added some depth in other ways to pitching. You've got Arkansas. You never count Dave Van Horn out. They were as consistent as you come. And they got some top end guys in Wiggins and Will McIntyre and guys that really pitched some good innings for them in the end. They've got Arkansas's always got some hitting. We haven't even talked about Ole Miss much. Ole Miss talk about finding pitching at the end. They rode two guys and a couple of bullpen guys to a national title. You got Jacob Gonzalez back. You got some guys that have been there and done that. And then, of course, when you get to the postseason and you've done it on the big stage, that's a big thing. But we will talk about all these teams in more depth. But I think the point today was to explain why we felt LSU was deserving of the preseason accolades it is getting. In my mind, it is still the most defensible pick, and it could be a team from the ages when we wrap things up in late June after the dust has settled in Omaha. We'll see how that goes.
yeah, consider this the appetizer because, like Chris said, we're gonna have a preview for every team. I know this kind of feels like maybe our LSU preview, but we'll discuss some more things once we get to those. So we'll have team previews, all 14 teams here start to roll out as we move forward. Obviously, the season several weeks away now. So we'll have all those coming up. We'll have our full preseason rankings, which we kind of talked about. The polls elsewhere, but we'll put our rankings together and give you our 1 through 14 heading into the season, and a lot of just fun stuff. Like I said, this is, you guys know, and Chris has talked about it before. Baseball, we really want to do a lot with baseball, and obviously Chris had a situation that sort of prevented that last season, and so we're going to take everything we were going to do, in that range, and we're just going to go all in now on doing it. So so again, if you're an SEC baseball fan, hit the subscribe button. You obviously see all of our SEC football and basketball content. That will continue, but we are really gearing up our SEC baseball stuff, and you will have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, baseball. I'm the guy that founded this, and part of the principle was I didn't think baseball was covered enough on a league level. You can see the stuff behind me, the memorabilia. It is my favorite sport. It's the one I know the most about. It's the one I'm most passionate about. So if you like what we do for football and hoops, you're going to like baseball, what we do here, at least as much or more. And I've watched a couple of decades of SEC baseball, so there's some knowledge of how these things work in the past that's going into that too. But anyway, if you like our stuff, hit that subscribe button, tell a friend, hit the like button. All those things get us noticed. We still got tons of football stuff coming too, basketball stuff almost on a daily basis. Again, if you love the big three sports in the SEC, and hopefully we'll be doing some more coverage and some other things as we expand a little bit, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of it. He is Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14. We'll see you again soon.